Lisa Vetner, Research Associate at the Southern Centre for Inequality Studies at Wits University, and Sibongile Ndashe is an Executive Director at the Initiative for Strategic Litigation in Africa. Good morning to you both, and thank you so much for joining us. Sibongile, if I may just start with you. The NPA, considering its options, we understand, quite a stern rebuke from the judge, I thought, yesterday for the way prosecutors had handled this. From what you know, are there possible grounds for an appeal by the NPA? Could they bring this case against Omotoso again?
So thank you for having me here, Stephen. If the NPA, in their review of the decision, feel that there are things that the judge did not get correctly, then obviously they may continue. But what is different really about this case from other cases where we have seen the NPA appeal, it's where the court has really failed to protect. So maybe when the court has used rape myths, gender stereotype, and all of that. But in this case, this rebuke by the court is also a public lecture on the law of evidence, which really makes it hard for the NPA, because she knows that there is interest from the public. And so she says, she goes into a lot of detail to explain what the NPA was supposed to have done and did not do, in this case. So it will be very hard, for the NPA to actually appeal this case based on how the decision is written, because this is a court that says, my hands are tied. In South Africa, we have got an adversarial system. So judge may have been sitting there watching what's happening, but she cannot kind of intervene and start asking questions. But she's saying in a decision, these are the questions that you should have asked. So I think that's what makes it hard. But this is not the end of the road for the victims in this case. So for the NPA, yes. But for the victims, there is something that can still be done.
Lisa Vetner, there's been so much conversation around how so many people are frustrated by the outcome of this. Do you blame the NPA, which has had several cases which have not gone its way? Do you blame the entire legal system, perhaps, for where we are this morning?
Well, I think the NPA has to take a very long, hard look at itself. What people are seeing very publicly is what happens to many other rape cases that never ever make a headline and never make it to social media. Because I think what we are seeing here is a decade's worth of decline in the prosecuting authority. If you look at 2013-14, they were able to put down more than 8,000 rapes for prosecution. In the last financial year, that had dropped to 5,200. So they have lost the capacity, or put it this way, 3,000 rape cases fewer are being prosecuted than 10 years ago. And where they were managing to secure convictions in more than 5,500 cases 10 years ago, they've now dropped to 3,800. So this is a decline in performance. What we've seen in the Omotoso case is, I think, a very public representation of it, but it's not exceptional and it's not unique. And it's an urgent call to understand what is going wrong from the moment of reporting all the way through to the point of conviction.
Sibongile, there's so much in that. We know there are problems with the police investigation here. You say there may still be other options for the victims. I don't know what those would be, and I worry that the victims might now find themselves, by law I'm supposed to say alleged victims now, I suppose, but the young woman who made these claims against Omotoso, and we saw them do it, now face all sorts of risks to themselves, I'm sure.
I think this is what the victims have been saying about the comments on social media and all of them. So the public attacks have not stopped. And I am sure after yesterday's victory for Omotoso, there should be more, that's kind of out there, because that's a context that we have. But where we need to kind of move on to is, in the criminal justice system, the victim is represented, by the state. There have been conversation about a more prominent role for victims advocates. But most of us who work in this sector want to push for effective prosecution so that we don't actually say, that we're just giving up on the criminal justice system because many people rely on the justice system to be responsive. Where we need to move on to is to hold the state accountable for failure to act with due diligence to prosecute these cases. Because under international law, which is also part of our law in South Africa, if a state acts in such a way that the perpetrators of violence are not held to accountable, then that can be attributed to the state. So this can be in a form of constitutional litigation, but we need to be able to show that the state has failed in its obligation. And I think this decision really can help, the victims to pursue that kind of action against the state for failure to protect.
Lisa, we have seen, if I recall, at least one constitutional court case like that in the past, the Carmichael case. The problem is, of course, that now, if you are someone who's been let down by the system, you're probably not going to engage with the system again. And Lisa, I think particular, there are concerns this morning about how so many people who might have been attacked by men will have seen all of this play out, and there's no incentive for them to go to the police now.
But it isn't. I think this case has really undermined the credibility of the criminal justice system. So they're going to need to work very, very hard in order to regain people's trust and belief in them. And I think that starts with reviewing what's going wrong, because these are system failures. Omotoso is not some unique exception. There's a deeper systemic problem, and it's got to start with things as simple as the prosecution now being forced to tell every rape complainant whose case they will not prosecute, they need to give them reasons as to why not. So those reasons can be challenged. I mean, I think that's a starting point. We need to be looking at what's the quality of training that's being given to prosecutors. What's the kind of supervision when there is a very difficult matter? But I think the other thing we have to ask, and it's very appropriate right now in the light of everything that's going on around the budget, is how much funding is the NPA getting? Because part of the decline in these prosecutions, I do think, if you track the numbers of people being employed, does seem to go with the freeze on posts and the austerity measures that have been implemented in government. So if the government wants to tell us that they are serious about gender-based violence, then they must employ a sufficient number of people in order to do justice. And they must go and look at possibly cutting unnecessary perks wherever they may find them in government, and unnecessary programs, in order to ensure they give these basic rights to rape complainants. You cannot tell people to break the silence, to go and report when this is the kind of outcome that you're getting.
There's so much that needs to be done here. I mean, Sibongile, so many politicians tell us, they promise us that gender-based violence is a government priority. But when you look at the actual numbers that the amount of money that goes to the NPA, it doesn't look like that. It doesn't look like it's a priority at all. And it doesn't look, I'm sorry to say this, it doesn't look like anything's going to change.
I think about 5 years ago, actually, in this April, we all committed to this national strategic plan, on the gender-based violence and femicide, which was the roadmap, whatever limitations it may have, but it looked like a plan that could actually take us somewhere in terms of how we respond to this. And one of the first things about this, which was different from other national strategic plans that we have, was that we needed to have leadership and coordination of the response, and that we needed to have political champions. What has happened in the past 5 years is nothing short of a huge demonstration that government is really paying lip service when it talks about its commitment to ending gender-based violence and femicide. The past 5 years, we have been fighting for a legislation that would set up a council that is going to provide all of these things that are in the National Strategic Plan. Last year, Parliament approved, a president signed a new law which has got nothing. It removed all the essential things that are required for the plan to work. So the coordination of the response, we are talking about leadership at a senior level, like an interministerial committee. We've got the president who is there as a champion. The legislation does not include any of these provisions. And so now we have got the Department of Women and the presidency that are pushing to have this council set up. But once again, it's another political gimmick that doesn't really have the commitment to ending gender-based violence and femicide. And going back to this case, there is the issue about money and all of these things. But when you look at the prosecution team that was assembled, so we are talking about resources, financial resources, but we also need to talk about the quality of the prosecution. So yes, there may be cases that many people have, but most of us who litigate in a big case, we've got a team, you have to strategize. The judge says you have 9 days to deal with this evidence, right? Omotoso was on the stand for 1 day, and the cross-examination only took the morning part of it. There were a lot of things that were contradictory that they needed to, because the end result is if you do not challenge the evidence, it's basically admitted, that you don't have a problem with what they said. And she consistently kind of goes through this. So yes, there is a financial part of it, and what Lisa's talking about, the training, but effective prosecution is what we actually need. You have got the case before you, you have to prepare. These are senior prosecutors. I mean, the thing that happened with the other prosecutor having to withdraw because of what they said to the statement, this was incompetence.
Sibongile Ndashe, thank you. Executive Director at the Initiative for Strategic Litigation in Africa. Lisa Vettens at the Southern Centre for Inequality Studies at Wits University. Not the last conversation we will have about this.